On a family trip, my husband suddenly stopped the car and demanded I sign away the $100 million inheritance from my parents. When I refused, my ruthless mother-in-law forced me to sign and then pushed me off a cliff into the sea, coldly saying, "Goodbye, your chapter is over." But against all odds, I survived and returned to take revenge in a way they never saw coming. I always thought my life was a fairy tale. I met Adam Williams when we were both in college, and from the very first time I saw him, I knew he was the one. He had that warm smile, the one that could make anyone feel at ease, and those eyes that sparkled with kindness. We spent hours talking, studying together, laughing, and sharing our dreams about the future. It didn't take long for us to fall in love. After graduation, we got married in a small ceremony surrounded by our closest friends and family. I thought we had it all, a perfect life, a beautiful home, and most importantly, we had each other. We moved to Austin, Texas, shortly after, where Adam started working for a private company. He was ambitious, driven, and a true professional. I was content being a supportive wife, and while I worked for a time, I eventually decided to stay at home. I focused on making our home warm and welcoming for Adam after a long day's work. We had our routines, our plans, and our love. It was everything I had ever wanted. But then things started changing, and I could feel it in the air, though I didn't know exactly what it was. It all started with my mother-in-law, Catherine. Catherine had always been a strong presence in our lives. In the beginning, she seemed to like me well enough, or so I thought. But after we got married, it was as though something shifted. She became distant and, at times, downright rude. I tried to be patient, understanding, and respectful. I wanted to be the perfect daughter-in-law. But no matter how hard I tried, I could never do anything right in her eyes. She often criticized the way I decorated our home, the way I cooked, even the way I dressed. "You should dress more like this," she'd say, or "This house doesn't look like a home. It looks too modern." Everything I did seemed to irritate her. But I tried to stay calm, thinking it would get better with time. What I didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a much deeper problem. A few years later, my world was shattered when I lost both of my parents in a tragic accident. It was a devastating blow, one I'm still struggling to heal from. But as the dust settled and I tried to find my way through the grief, something unexpected happened. I inherited everything they had left behind. It wasn't just money. It was the family mansion, a grand estate that had been in my family for generations. The mansion was everything to me. It was a symbol of my parents' love and hard work, the place where I grew up, where I made memories with them. When I first walked through the mansion after the funeral, it felt like a part of them was still there, in every corner of the house. I knew that no matter what, I could never sell it. It meant too much to me. It was my legacy, my connection to my parents, and the one thing I could hold on to in their absence. But that was when things took a sharp turn. Catherine began pressuring me to sell the mansion. She told me I should use the money to start a business for Adam. "It's too big for just one person," she would say. "You don't need it. Think about what you could do with all that money." The insinuation was always the same: sell the house, get rid of it, and put the money to better use. She would bring it up constantly, almost every time she visited. It felt like she wasn't just trying to help. She was trying to control. I told her repeatedly that I couldn't sell the mansion. "This house is all I have left of my parents," I said. "I can't just give it away." But Catherine wasn't giving up. And neither was Adam. Adam, who had always been so kind and understanding, started to change. He sided with his mother more and more, and the pressure to sell grew even stronger. He would tell me, "Olivia, it's just a house. We could use the money to do so much. It would help me start my business, and we could finally live comfortably." But I refused. I couldn't understand why they couldn't see how important this mansion was to me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about preserving the memory of my parents. But my refusal seemed to have set something in motion that I couldn't have predicted. It all came to a head during a family trip to California. Adam and I were supposed to be celebrating a peaceful getaway, a break from everything. We rented a car and drove along the breathtaking coastline, the ocean stretching out endlessly before us. It was beautiful, a perfect moment to unwind. But then something changed. As we were driving through a particularly secluded part of the coast, Adam suddenly pulled the car over. He didn't say a word at first. I was surprised but assumed he was stopping to enjoy the view. But when he turned to me, his face was serious, almost cold. "Olivia," he said, his voice low, "I need you to sign these papers. Right now." I stared at him, confused. "What papers?" "They're the transfer papers for the mansion. You're going to sign them, and we'll finally be able to move forward with the business plan I've been telling you about." My heart sank. "Adam, no. I told you, I can't sell the house. You know how much it means to me." His expression hardened, and I could see the frustration in his eyes. "You don't understand, Olivia. This is for our future. For our family. If you don't sign, there will be consequences." Before I could even process what he was saying, Catherine, who had been silent up until then, spoke up from the back seat. "Sign it, Olivia. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. This is what's best for everyone." I felt trapped. I tried to speak, to reason with them, but they were both unyielding. Adam's voice turned cold. "You either sign it now, or we'll make you regret it." The words stung, but nothing could prepare me for what happened next. I refused again, and that was when the unthinkable happened. Adam's eyes darkened, and without warning, he grabbed my arm, pulling me out of the car. Catherine, too, was suddenly all force and control. They both pushed me towards the cliffside. I couldn't understand what was happening. Panic gripped me as I stumbled backward. "Sign it, Olivia," Adam demanded, "or this chapter of your life is over." And in that moment, I realized they weren't just talking about the house. They were talking about my life. I was terrified, desperate, and with my heart racing, I did the only thing I could do to survive. I signed the papers. But even as I did, I knew it wouldn't be the end of the story. What came next was the last thing I could ever have expected. I don't know how long I stood there, trembling, after I signed the papers. My heart was racing, my hands shaking as I held the pen. Adam and Catherine didn't seem to care. They just stared at me, their eyes hard and cold. They believed they had won, they thought they had control of everything. Adam, still silent, shoved me away from the car, his face twisted in disgust. "Now, we can finally move on," he muttered under his breath. I barely heard him. I was too focused on the fact that I had just signed away everything that mattered to me. Everything my parents had worked for, everything they had left behind for me. And they didn't even flinch. They shoved me further towards the cliffside, and I could feel my legs weakening, my mind scrambling for any possible way to escape. But there was nowhere to run. They had planned this. They had planned for me to give in, and I had done just that, out of fear, out of desperation, just to survive. I signed my inheritance away, and now there was nothing left to do but hope that somehow I'd make it through this. "Get out of the car," Adam ordered, his voice flat, emotionless. It felt like a nightmare. I didn't want to believe what was happening, but as they pulled me from the car and forced me closer to the edge of the cliff, the reality set in. My breath caught in my throat as I looked down at the jagged rocks far below, the endless blue of the sea crashing against them. I could barely comprehend what they were about to do. "Say goodbye, Olivia," Catherine said coldly, her voice barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the air like a knife. And then, in a split second, they both pushed me. I remember the sharp gasp that escaped my lips as I stumbled and fell. I could hear their voices fading, their laughter echoing in my ears. "This chapter is over," they said, as if my life meant nothing. The fall felt like an eternity, but it all happened so fast. One moment I was on solid ground, the next, I was plunging into the air, screaming, as the world spun around me. The wind roared in my ears, and the ground below seemed to rise up to meet me with terrifying speed. But then, something miraculous happened. Instead of crashing into the rocks below, I felt a sharp tug, and suddenly, I was hitting the cold water. The shock of the cold water sent a jolt through my body, and for a moment, I couldn't think. My lungs burned, and the world was dark and swirling around me. I struggled, gasping for air, but the waves were strong, and the current was pulling me under. I thought that was it. I thought I had died. But then, something pulled me to the surface, a strong arm around my waist, lifting me from the water. "Hold on," a voice called, and I tried to focus on it, tried to stay conscious. I had no strength left, but somehow, I clung to the hope that I wasn't alone. The man, whoever he was, pulled me to the shore, dragging me across the wet sand. My body was aching, my head spinning, but I managed to blink and take in my surroundings. I was on the edge of the cliff, the spot where Adam and Catherine had pushed me. The man had saved me. He was tall, with short brown hair and kind, steady eyes. He seemed to know exactly what he was doing. Without a word, he moved me into the safety of a small cabin nearby, a small, rustic place by the sea. "You're safe now," he said, his voice calm, comforting. "You're going to be okay." I couldn't respond. I could barely speak. I was too exhausted, too shaken to process everything that had happened. I had barely survived a fall from a cliff, and here I was breathing alive. The man, whose name I later learned was Ethan, wrapped me in a thick blanket and made me tea to calm me down. I was trembling, not just from the cold but from the shock of everything that had happened. My mind kept racing, replaying the events over and over again. Adam and Catherine had tried to kill me. They thought they had won, that they had everything they wanted. But they had made a fatal mistake. They thought I was gone. They thought they had gotten rid of me. But I was alive, and I wasn't going to let them get away with what they had done. For the next few days, Ethan took care of me. He gave me food, shelter, and clothing. He listened patiently as I told him what had happened, though I couldn't explain everything all at once. I was still in shock, still trying to understand the depth of the betrayal. Adam, the man I had loved and trusted, had turned on me. Catherine, too, the woman I had tried so hard to get along with. Together, they had pushed me to the edge of death. But I wasn't going to let them win. No, I wasn't going to stay silent and let them get away with this. They thought they had stolen everything from me, but I still had something they didn't. My life. I stayed with Ethan for a few days, recovering both physically and mentally. And during that time, I made a decision. I wasn't going to run away. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. I was going to fight back. I was going to take back everything they had tried to take from me. I hired a lawyer. I filed for divorce. I would not let Adam and Catherine think they had succeeded. They had pushed me off a cliff, but they didn't know the power of my will. I would make them pay. I would show them that no amount of money, no amount of manipulation, could destroy me. I was stronger than they could ever imagine. And so, I began to prepare for the next step. It wasn't just about the mansion anymore. It was about justice. It was about proving that no one could betray me and walk away unscathed. I wasn't the same woman who had been pushed off that cliff. No, I had been reborn, and the fire inside me was burning brighter than ever. I had been through hell, but I survived, and I was going to make sure that Adam and Catherine paid for what they had done. It wasn't just about the mansion anymore. It was about taking back my life, my dignity, and my future. I started by filing for divorce. That was the first step. I had to sever all ties with Adam, the man I once loved, the man who had betrayed me so completely. The moment I walked into the lawyer's office, I knew there was no turning back. The papers were signed, and the process was set in motion. I remember sitting across from my lawyer, a woman named Julia, who had been recommended by Ethan. She was calm, professional, and knew exactly what to do. She didn't need to ask me much. She could see the determination in my eyes. "We'll fight this, Olivia," she said, her voice firm. "We'll make sure they can't get away with it." I told Julia everything. The threats, the manipulation, the forced signature on the transfer documents. I explained how Adam and Catherine had tried to kill me, how they had pushed me off that cliff, and how they thought I was dead. They had believed I would never come back, that I wouldn't survive to expose their lies and greed. Julia listened carefully, taking notes, then looked up at me. "We have something they don't expect. Proof of your survival and the circumstances surrounding the signature. That fake transfer, it's not valid. They coerced you. We can prove it. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest. There was hope. Real hope. It wasn't just about fighting for the mansion anymore. It was about making sure Adam and Catherine were held accountable for their actions. They had tried to destroy me, and I was going to make sure they faced the consequences. As the divorce proceedings began, I couldn't help but wonder how Adam and Catherine were reacting. They must have thought they were in the clear. After all, they believed they had successfully gotten me out of the way. They believed they now controlled the mansion. But they were about to be hit with a shocking truth. I wasn't dead, and I hadn't signed those papers willingly. I had signed under duress, and that made all the difference. A few weeks later, the court hearings began. Adam and Catherine were both there, sitting with their lawyer, looking smug and confident. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they had won, that I had just rolled over and given up. But they didn't know that I had been preparing. I had the documents, the evidence, and the legal backing to destroy their entire plan. I could see it in their eyes when they saw me walk into that courtroom. They weren't expecting me. They were expecting a grieving widow, someone who had given up and moved on. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was strong, determined, and ready to make them pay. When the lawyer presented the forged signature, the one I had signed under extreme pressure and fear for my life, Adam and Catherine's faces went pale. The shock on their faces was enough to make my heart race with satisfaction. They didn't expect this. They didn't expect me to be alive. They didn't expect that I would come back and fight for everything they had taken from me. And as the judge began to read through the evidence, I felt a surge of hope. Justice was coming. And no matter how hard Adam and Catherine tried, they were going to lose everything. The days leading up to the final hearing felt like an eternity. I could barely sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of what would happen in that courtroom. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let Adam and Catherine get away with what they had done. They had tried to steal my life, my legacy, my parents' mansion, and now they were going to pay for it. On the day of the final hearing, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. Adam and Catherine were already there, sitting with their lawyer, looking smug, as if they had already won. They didn't know it yet, but everything they had done was about to unravel. The first few hours of the hearing felt like a blur, but then the moment came. Julia, my lawyer, presented the evidence, the forged documents, the witnesses who had seen Adam and Catherine push me towards the cliff, and the testimony that I had been coerced into signing the transfer papers. I could see Adam and Catherine growing more nervous as the case unfolded. They thought they had covered their tracks, but they hadn't counted on one thing: my resilience. When it was my turn to speak, I could barely contain the emotion. I told the court everything: how Adam had turned on me, how Catherine had manipulated me, and how they had both tried to kill me. I spoke of the fear, the helplessness I had felt in those final moments before they pushed me off the cliff. But most importantly, I spoke of how I survived. I told them how I had been saved by a stranger, how I had come back to reclaim my life. As I finished speaking, I looked directly at Adam and Catherine. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. They thought I was dead. They thought they had won. But now, the truth was out. The judge listened carefully to all the evidence, and when it was time to deliver the verdict, there was no hesitation. Adam Williams and Catherine Williams, the judge said, his voice steady, "You are guilty of multiple charges, including fraud, coercion, and attempted murder. You are hereby sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and the court orders the invalidation of the transfer of property." I could hardly believe it. They had been convicted. Adam and Catherine were going to prison, and the mansion, my parents' legacy, would remain in my hands. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, mixed with a deep, overwhelming sense of justice. They had tried to take everything from me, but I had fought back, and I had won. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't the same woman who had been pushed off that cliff. I had come back stronger, and now I was finally free. The mansion was mine again, and more importantly, I had rid myself of the toxic people who had tried to destroy me. The road to justice hadn't been easy. There had been fear, pain, and betrayal along the way. But in the end, my strength, my resilience, and my unwavering belief in doing what was right had prevailed. Adam and Catherine had thought they could break me, but they underestimated me. And now, they would have to face the consequences of their actions. As for me, I stood tall, owning not just a $100 million mansion, but my life, my future. I had reclaimed everything they had tried to take from me. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened from here on out, I would always be stronger than they could ever imagine. The last chapter of my life had been written, and it was one of triumph, not defeat. I had survived, and I had won.